I will call the meeting to order, and while we're waiting, people y'all get connected up. Shannon, do you want to introduce what's going on with the City Planning Department?
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Shannon Mulderig. I know most of you know me already. I am an associate planner with the planning department, and exciting news, Michael Prince has accepted a promotion in the development services department. So I am now the project lead for the Hillcrest Focused Plan Amendment, and also the community planner for the Uptown community area. So I'm very excited to be here and continue in this process with you all, and looking forward to tonight's presentation.
Well, thank you, Shannon. And for those who don't know, I'm Roy Dahl. I'm a Hillcrest resident, and I am chair of the subcommittee, at least until the next election. And I'll ask the other board members on the subcommittee to introduce themselves at this point.
Hi, Gail Freed, and I live in Hillcrest.
Bill Ellig, University Heights.
Tom, you're on mute.
Tom Mulaney.
And Brer, are you there?
I am here. Brer Marsh. Hi.
Okay. All right, thank you. So the planning department has a presentation on mobility. This is the second time we're looking at mobility, which is actually justified since mobility is one of the more important issues with planning. So I will let them go ahead and start their presentation.
Thank you so much. And Monique, whenever you're ready, share your screen. All right, well, I'll kick us off. Perfect. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Again, I'll introduce myself. I'm Shannon Mulderig, an associate planner with the planning department and the project lead for the Hillcrest Focused Plan Amendment. Tonight's presentation is on mobility network scenarios, which builds upon the mobility meeting from January. Next slide. And presenting tonight are some familiar faces: Tanner French, Senior Traffic Engineer with the City of San Diego, Monique Chen, Fong Nguyen, and Sasha Jovanovic from Chen Ryan and Associates, our mobility consultants on this project. We have other team members tuning in tonight as well: Gabriella Folino with Diet and Batia, Katie Witherspoon, Senior Planner with the Planning Department, and among others. And we're excited to hear feedback from you all tonight. Next slide. Some housekeeping. Please use the chat function to share your thoughts with everyone and to ask questions. And we have a lot of content tonight, so we will be pausing a few times throughout the presentation to take clarifying questions. But then at the end of the presentation, we'll open it up for a more broad discussion from the whole group. And I want to note that this presentation is available on planhillcrest.org right now under the meetings and updates tab. So if you wish to pull it up yourself on your computer and kind of scroll through the slides as we go to follow along, that is an option for you. And then we will upload the chat log and the recording on the website after the meeting. So I will now pass it off to Tanner French.
All right, thank you, Shannon, and thank you all for joining us tonight as we discuss the mobility network scenarios for the Hillcrest Focused Plan Amendment. As mentioned, I'm Tanner French, a senior traffic engineer with the City of San Diego. It's nice to see all of you tonight. Tonight, we'll be covering the following 5 topics. First, I'll provide a quick overview and a reminder of our mobility planning process. I'll provide a review of the January meeting and the concepts and ideas that we discussed. And finally, I'll walk through our network development process and what we've been doing over the past several months before passing the presentation off to Chen Ryan staff to discuss the 3 draft network scenarios that we've developed. The network scenarios discussion will account for the majority of our conversation tonight. So, and then we'll go cover next steps. So next slide. As we've shown in previous presentations, our overall mobility planning approach is really made up of 5 distinct parts. There's research and data collection, there's existing conditions, and then this kind of middle development stage, and then mobility analysis, and finally, the development of the mobility element in the community plan. So next slide. The longest and most involved is this current middle section that we're in now. As shown, this includes developing concepts and network scenarios, as we discussed in January, and we'll continue that discussion today, obtaining input from the community and various other stakeholders. And in the coming months, this will also include measuring our recommendations with land use scenarios for compatibility and developing plan policies. So next slide, just to kind of remind us of the conversation in January. The presentation in January centered around 2 main concepts for University Avenue. The first shown here was a couplet concept, where University Avenue would become one-way westbound and Robinson Avenue would become one-way eastbound. As seen on the slide, the concept received a mixed bag of support and non-support. More importantly, through the discussion and the review and response of the meeting chat, we heard valuable input about some of the drawbacks of a full couplet concept. So next slide. The second University Avenue concept was converting the corridor to transit, active transportation, and emergency vehicles only, as depicted on the slide. Again, the concept received a mixed bag of support and non-support. However, through the discussion and the chat, there was more dialogue about how to improve the concept and things to consider if the concept moved forward. So elements of both of these concepts have been carried forward and modified, while some have been completely eliminated. Next slide. Also in the January presentation, we conducted a poll about right-of-way priorities. As can be seen, when given the option to choose the top 2 priorities, bicycles and transit led the way, active public spaces and wider sidewalks closely followed, while parking and vehicular facilities trailed. Next slide. I also wanted to quickly discuss and note other miscellaneous but very important items that we discussed in January. We discussed operational issues like intersection treatments and different types of mid-block crossings. We discussed and heard a lot of feedback about park once opportunities, as well as mobility hub treatments and alley activation. While we won't necessarily cover these topics again tonight, they are things that we'll continue to work on and look to implement in the plan. Next slide. Okay, so on to what we're really here to talk about tonight. After receiving input about those higher level concepts that we discussed in January, our task has been to develop the full roadway network recommendations. But also stepping back a bit, we wanted to make sure that we're staying connected with the other disciplines and the plan update process as a whole. As such, part of the network development involves looking at the 5 guiding principles developed earlier in the process. Specifically, we'd be looking at the 2 noted pillars shown on the slide, making sure we're connecting people with businesses and services and making it easier to move around. Also, as mentioned in the introduction to our January presentation, our process always involves making sure that we're consistent with other city plans and documents, like the Climate Action Plan and the General Plan City of Villages strategy, amongst many others. So next slide. So aside from this group's input, we've also solicited input from other stakeholders, including Caltrans and SANDAG and the city's fire department, to discuss and vet the information. Each of these groups provides unique perspectives, and cumulatively, we've used all of the input to develop 3 network scenarios that we'll present tonight. Next slide. So the 3 network scenarios are listed on this slide. As you can see, the options still center around University Avenue and Robinson, and this isn't because we're not focusing on the other roadways, but because University is so central to the community and the mobility network. It's also where much of the growth is envisioned. So what happens with University Avenue ultimately has effect on the other roadway networks, or the other roadway in the network, especially the east-west roadways. So when Chen Ryan staff walks through the respective options, they'll start with the central theme of the option, which is University Avenue, but also note key recommendations throughout the community. They'll do this from a perspective of all modes, and they'll kind of show how they're all interacting within that specific scenario. So the first scenario carries forward that transit, multimodal, and emergency only setup for University Avenue, but it introduces changes that we've made based on feedback. The second allocates right-of-way for transit-only lanes, but continues to allow vehicular traffic on University, an option we wanted to look at. And third is a hybrid option that we've developed to try to incorporate some of the benefits of both of the first two options. So each of these options will provide distinct benefits for certain modes while being unable to do so for other modes because of competing priorities and constrained rights of way. And that's really the point that we want to get across tonight is showing those interactions. And that's really what we'd like to see that feedback on tonight. As Chen Ryan staff walks through each scenario, they've included an overview of the network from the map perspective, so kind of top down, and that will be followed by cross-section views of the main roadways so that you can get a good sense of what each would look like. It will be a lot of information, but what we're trying to do is show each network option, show enough information to ensure that they're well thought out without kind of overwhelming with information. So to that end, as Shannon mentioned, we'll plan for providing short 5 or so minute sessions after each option for clarifying questions. And then after the third and final scenario, we've planned the full roundtable discussion that this group is accustomed to. And we should hopefully have around 30 minutes or so for that. So what we'd like as the outcome of tonight's meeting is not to fully decide on a network scenario, but rather to provide information on the options and obtain feedback on each of them. Our plan is to tailor the options based on that feedback and include them in the online community engagement tool that Shannon and the rest of the team will be unveiling later in the fall. So you know that will be the format or the mechanism to kind of finally provide vote on each of the options. Okay, so with that, I'll pass the presentation over to Monique from Chen Ryan to discuss the pedestrian and transit network quickly, and then jump right into our first network scenario. So take it away, Monique.
Thank you so much, Tanner. Good evening, everyone. As Tanner mentioned, so this evening we have a lot of materials, and I want to start talking about the various mobility networks for each travel mode. For pedestrian and transit travel modes, we're only going to have one network to share as there's not going to be a whole lot of variation. So I'm going to start with the pedestrian network here. So route types help to establish a framework for pedestrian network planning, and it is very heavily influenced by land uses. Mixed uses, local serving retail, restaurants, entertainment, schools, parks. These are just some of the land uses that could result in high pedestrian activity, high pedestrian demand. District here you see in red usually represent the highest pedestrian activity levels. Corridors are representing of the moderate pedestrian activity levels, while connectors represents relatively low pedestrian activity levels. So the network you see here really reflects the currently adopted Uptown Community Plan pedestrian route types, with normal street promenade being added here. So you can see that's a district here. Now, this map will change. This map will be updated once the land use alternatives become available. We will be sure that we're going to work in close coordination with both our land use and urban design teammates to really looking at the treatments as we develop, improvement for how do we improve pedestrian realms throughout the study area. In terms of transit planning, as we have mentioned in the past, SANDAG is our regional transit planning agency. So what we have here is the SANDAG planned transit network for Hillcrest that is currently reflected in the draft 2021 RTP, which is anticipated to be adopted later this year in October. We've also met with SANDAG planning staff, and we were told that these alignments are not set in stone. So we do have some flexibilities in terms of making alignment recommendations. So on this one, based on our team's review of the light rail alignment earlier, the light was showing from 5th Avenue going up onto University, then going up onto Park Boulevard. But because we know the cycle tracks are coming on University, I'm sorry, on 5th Avenue, as well as 5th Avenue actually provides some very important direct vehicular access to some existing buildings for townhomes. So we as a team thought that 6th Avenue is a better alignment for the future light rail. Sorry, I keep on having this glitch. So now we're going to option 1 of the vehicular network. This option reflects what Tanner mentioned earlier, the transit multimodal emergency access only option for University Avenue, which we discussed back in January at a pretty high level. And it received about 50% of support from the participant during that meeting. So we as a team decided, let's take a closer look at this option. So in the next slide, we'll show the roadway changes suggested also for the option 1 network. The red line on this map you see here is the transit emergency multimodal only corridor. And this section spans from 4th Avenue to Park Boulevard. While this option provides a supreme corridor for walking, biking, transit operations, but it does also create some challenges in terms of vehicular circulation that also could potentially impact some access to local businesses that's located adjacent to University Avenue. Tanner mentioned that we've talked to the fire department, so we heard some concerns from our fire department in terms of the access and also potential response time for them to get to emergencies if this section is close to vehicular travel. And so since there's a fire station located on 9th and University. I would also like to point out a few other roadway modifications. Note that these modifications are going to be consistent among all 3 network options that we're going to be talking about this evening. The first set is we're designating Bachman Place as well as 10th Avenue as circulation element roadways. These 2 roads currently in the Uptown Plan are considered as local streets. But because of the important roles they're playing in the Hillcrest transportation system, we decided to have them designated as circulation or mobility element roadway. And the next one I want to focus on is 6th Avenue. We're proposing to convert 2 travel lanes, 1 lane each direction, to accommodate the future light rail alignment. And the last one I want to bring your attention to is a potential road diet for Washington Street east of the ISR 125 freeway. And this is really we need to vet this out a little bit more once we have everything modeled and to see if there's that need for maintaining 5 and 6 lane of travel on this section of the Washington Street. Now, if we were able to reduce the travel lane and there's going to be some extra space can be utilized for linear park, other pedestrian facilities or bicycle facilities that the community may want to see. And the last thing I want to touch on quickly is we will be looking at improving the interchange operations, both at the exit on University as well as Washington. We want to look at how we can really improve the efficiencies of these two locations to help facilitate flow on Washington Street. So here is the draft bicycle network reflecting option 1. Roadway network. As you can see, we got University Avenue being this class 4 facility traverse all the way from 4th to Park. And that really matches up well with the the currently under construction cycle tracks on 5th Avenue than the 4th Avenue. Another thing with the road diet we're doing, if that takes place on Washington, you will see we're going to be able to build another Class 4 facility that feeds into the normal street promenade. And one of the things I also want to point out is that the Washington Street Class 4 will then feed into El Cajon Boulevard, and that facility right now has a bicycle and transit share lane. So as you can see, we're looking at pretty expensive bicycle network, high quality bicycle network that's not only serving the study area, but also providing connections to neighboring to the neighborhood communities. Two other things I want to point out here. One is SANDAG is working on, as you all know, the Bachman Place Bikeway project. And as part of that Bikeway project, SANDAG is proposing contraflow bike lanes on 3rd Avenue between Lewis Street and Washington Street, as well as Lewis Street between Bachman and 3rd Avenue. I will talk a little bit about, what are some of the benefits of this contraflow bike lane. Another thing I want to point out to bring to your attention to is that we're also proposing a newer type of a bicycle facility called advisory bike lane on Herbert Street. And Herbert Street is also part of the Uptown Bikeway. This is right now being proposed by SANDAG as a bicycle boulevard. And we felt like, with the advisory bike lane, we can really allocate this exclusive space for cyclists and just really elevate the environment, the safety, and the comfort level of cyclists that traverse on the Uptown University Bikeway. So contraflow bike lane, and here's a figure from NECTO. This is obviously a NECTO approved design style. What does it do in terms of why people want to provide contraflow bike lane? What are some of the benefits? It does provide connectivity and access to cyclists traveling in both directions on a narrower street, eliminates out of direction travel for cyclists. As we all know, the more direct the route, more chances are people wanted to bike more. So this is another one of those things that provides direct connection so cyclists can stay within the route they plan for. And because you have the bike facility covered on a one-way street, what it does is also reduces the wrong-way riding as well as sidewalk riding. Advisory bike lane is also called edge lane road. And this kind of facility really works well in a narrow setting where, we have right-of-way or roadway pavement constraints. However, it really just worked really, really well in low speed, low volume scenarios. Here are a few pictures that we gathered from various cities. Europe uses a lot of these, and these that are Midwest and Minneapolis on 14th Street, as well as East Coast and Canada. So these kind of applications is relatively new. However, our city is already starting to look at where else can we implement these kind of facilities. I know transportation and stormwater are looking at potentially putting an advisory bike lane on Hancock Street, just north of us here. Now, there's a lot of information. Now we'll dive even deeper, start looking at what are some of the roadways could look like with the various street options. So I'm going to talk about really focusing on option one. Since university varies in size and in cross section as of today, so we decided to break this corridor into 3 sections. The western section really focused between 1st around 6th Avenues, and the middle section is between 6th to 9th and 10th Avenues. And then the eastern section is 10th Avenue going east all the way to Park. So I'm going to present as such for both University and Robinson as a pair. That way we can see how these 2 corridors can work together. First, the western section of University, as you can see here, is relatively similar to what it is out there today with a 30-foot curb to curb. However, what we're proposing is to eliminate on-street parking on one side in lieu to install class 2 bicycle lanes in both directions. And in the pair south, just south of the University, we're looking at Robinson Avenue in the western section, 36 feet curb to curb existing, and we're not making any proposals to make cross-section changes under option 1. Going east along University Avenue in the middle section, and this is where things start to get interesting. If you recall earlier in the transit map, we're seeing the light rail start traversing from turning from 6th Avenue onto University. So here in this cross section, you see we have center running light rail. In the future, in the near term, it could be a rapid bus or our next gen buses traveling through. And on each side, you see a pretty wide bicycle facility in case, and I think this is wide enough to accommodate a fire emergency response as well, if that's needed. And going down from the same section onto Robinson, this is probably one of the most constrained section on Robinson. This is right on the overpass at 163, only about 26 feet curb to curb. So we're not proposing making any changes under this scenario. So just one lane per direction with no on-street parking with a class 3 bicycle route. Going east onto University, we're maintaining the center running transit. Now we're having a little bit bigger buffer because we have more room to play with. And then again, the dedicated separated bicycle lanes or cycle tracks. So what I want to point out is that the existing curb to curb for a large section of the eastern section actually range from 103 to 110 feet. So there's a lot of room that can be converted into pedestrian realm, wider sidewalk, place-making opportunities, as well as linear parks. And going east of between Normal and Park, the road does narrow a little bit. So that facility, the extra wide sidewalk may have to go away on the eastern side. So south of the University Avenue east on the eastern section of Robinson, this is again very similar to what it is out there today. We're not planning on or proposing to make any changes for this section under option 1. So really to think back, we didn't propose any changes on Robinson Avenue under option 1. Most of the variations that you see, the roadway modifications proposed is along University Avenue. So quickly talk about 5th Avenue, and this is you all probably see construction is happening on 5th Avenue to implement the cycle track. And so this is really reflecting what is going to be out there very soon, and also kind of a mirror image of what 4th Avenue could be looking like, with exception everything's traveling southbound. We talked about 6th Avenue being one of the potentially better alignment for the light rail. So here is a cross section represent what future 6th Avenue could look like. Again, converting travel lane from each one travel lane from each direction and convert that into light rail, guided way light rail, and then on-street parking and will be also lost at certain areas. Herbert Street, this reflects the advisory bike lane, 40 feet curb to curb with on-street parking maintained. And we go ahead and start designate the bike lane. So these are going to be, you're going to see them marked and striped on the pavement. But what is different than any other road is that you see the vehicular travel lane is much narrower than the 2 lanes. It's really just one travel lane. So when you see 2 vehicles coming from both directions, one vehicle would either veer off and get into the bike lane so the other one can pass. As it continues to move, then they can merge back into the travel lane. So this really provides a more kind of higher quality, more comfortable experience for cyclists with this scenario. With that, I'm going to pause and asking if there's any clarification questions for option 1. As both Tanner and Shannon mentioned, we're going to have a bigger discussion toward the end as you kind of listen to all of the options. So for this next 5 minutes, if there's any clarification questions for option 1, I'm here to answer. Go ahead, Tom. You're muted.
Yes, I was familiar with the plan, the SANDAG and city plan to have light rail go up Park Boulevard. When was there a change in the plan made to add University and the 4th, 5th, 6th corridor to light rail?
That is that comes around with the 5 big moves. If you heard, our region is pushing. So the newer, maybe I should go back, the University and University 5th, and those 2 were added as part of the 2021 RTP. And as you can see, there's even commuter rail also proposed within the university. Dark blue is actually commuter rail, so it's probably coming in the form, it'll be grade separated, so it's either elevated or subway style. So again, this is in part of the 2021 RTP that's out there for public review. SANDAG is anticipating to adopt this plan later this year in October.
I see. Huh. But the 5 big moves overall has like a $177 billion price tag. So is there any schedule assigned to this portion of the plan?
That is a great, Tanner, sounds like you want to say something. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I would just say that they have a reasonably expected and revenue constrained options, and we could. I don't think that we're necessarily here to talk about SANDAG's process, but
Right.
what we work with them as our long range transit planners, and what they're showing in their plans, we will do the best that we can to accommodate.
Sure. So, okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, there's lots of hands. Hold on, I gotta pull this up. All right, Lou, go for it.
Hi, thank you. On this option, I have a couple of specific questions. One has to do with how much, it's a relatively limited section that it looks as though you're suggesting having parking just on one side of the street and not on the other. And so that's a relatively limited number of absolutely directly affected businesses, although other businesses in the area might be affected indirectly. Is it possible to poll or talk with those business owners about their response to this? Because I think this is not, this is something that's, you can have general principles about, but there are very specific local impacts, and people might not realize that this is something that would mean directly in front of their business what would change. And I'm also wondering about the total number, because it seemed a relatively short area of parking spaces that would be affected. And I'm also wondering about the time frame of this plan versus SANDAG's plans for those transportation options, because SANDAG, as I recall, with some of these are quite a ways out. And so thank you.
Thank you, Lou. So I can start talking about the potential parking losses, and Tanner, feel free to chime in. So we have not reached out to individuals because these are very much so high-level drafts in terms of the detailed analysis where parking is going to be removed. We don't know that for sure. And another thing I want to really kind of circle back on is that we heard from all of you and others about this, wanting to implement Park One's idea in Hillcrest, figure out sites and locations where we can have more, kind of a bigger capture parking pool where it kind of offset some of the parking losses in Hillcrest that may be, as a result of implementing some of these facilities. So certainly that would be something, we're not talking about that tonight, but that would be something as we're moving forward with a plan, with the planning process, we'll be looking into Park One's concept as well. In terms of what's going to happen when. I think there are some recommendations that, that can happen pretty quickly, but come to the light rail or the guided busways, and that is, we're going to have to work in concert with SANDAG. So whenever they have the ability to do so, and we will be able to implement the cross section that we're recommending. Again, land use is another very important piece, because if we don't have the density necessary, it may not be a successful light rail alignment. Did I answer your question? Good.
Yeah, thank you for answering my question. I think it's hard, and I'm not saying that the parking, I'm not addressing a parking problem. It's just trying to understand how all of this works, and that everybody who's affected, has an opportunity. I know this is a high level plan, but before it moves to the next level, it would be good to get direct input from the people most directly affected. And I'm not saying that as an advocate of one position or another. I'd actually really like to, I'd really be curious to hear how they would weigh this in the balance, the alternative you're presenting. Thank you.
Well, I would, just to add a little bit, Lou, I would say that, if from the program or the PM's perspective, right, with Shannon and Katie and planning department management, if we wanted to do some sort of like direct mailer or whatever, we could look into those options. But I think, as we see these essentially are 3-year processes, that we would hope that through whatever this ends up being, the maybe 20 or 30 community meetings that we go to, that it's well known in the community that this is happening, and that the affected parties would be around as a part of that 3-year process. But again, we can do kind of more direct mailer outreach or something like that.
I'm just remembering when the Normal Street Promenade came up, at some business owners who were directly affected by that felt that they didn't even know what was happening until the very last minute. And maybe, it's easy to say, well, they should have known, but, I think going the extra mile to make sure there isn't that kind of feeling in the community, and to really learn from the ideas that they might have would be useful. That's a suggestion. Thank you for listening.
I may pick up a couple more, and then we can, I don't know, should we answer, there's 5 more hands. Should we answer all 5, or should we hold some of them to the end, Shannon?
I have noticed that Michael Donovan and Breer Marsh have had their hands up the longest, so maybe we can quickly get through those 2, and then if everyone else can save their questions for the next time we break or the end of the presentation when we open this up for discussion.
Okay, great. Mr. Marsh, go for it.
Hi, everyone. Great to see the evolution of the plans. I see some really great things here with bicycle facilities and pedestrian ways, and especially the addition of pedestrian way along Washington. I think that's something that people have mentioned, and I see you're incorporating, so thank you for that. I would like a little bit more clarification on the comment about running light rail along 6th. From my perspective, being that it is next to the park and has a park-like atmosphere, and also being one of the 2 streets that borders the park, at least from my perspective, maintaining that park-like atmosphere and its historic character would be in the interest of the community. And actually, the light rail might be better running on one of the streets that has perhaps buildings on both sides of the street, where it could be a more active and urban kind of atmosphere with light rail and shops and housing. Maybe you could explain a little bit more about that decision and how you see that working with the park.
Well, so that was one of the reasons we actually thought about 6th Avenue, because our Balboa Park is also very much so a tourist attraction, in addition to being this gem for those of us who live here. So having the light rail running on 6th, and that could, and then it circles back down to downtown, so it could really pick up some people that wanted to go to the park and they don't have vehicular access, and that would be one of the ways to get there. But even more importantly, the option that SANDAG were sharing with us is it could be either on 5th or 6th. And fifth, in terms of the space, unless we're going to take away all vehicular travel on 6th, which is going to be a problem because there are certain garages that are accessing 6th, and these are the pretty relatively new townhomes that are there. So that was kind of like taking the option away from us in the way. So 6th Avenue is a little bit bigger, has a little bit more flexibility. It is next to the park, which we thought may be a good idea to provide some transit access from the downtown area going up to Park and going through North Park.
I just have one additional comment, and that is I noticed there was a diagram of Robinson. It seems that it's going to remain car only because of its width. And I just like to point out that it is used by cyclists and pedestrians as a connection down the hill to Little Italy. And so to please keep that in mind, because it is one of the shortcuts to get from downtown Hillcrest to Little Italy on a bicycle quite quickly.
That's why you got to listen to the next few options.
Yeah,
there's
great,
some more exciting stuff coming.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Michael, you want to go for it?
Yes, I would. Just had a question on the cross-section of Eastern University Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
You show that one, yeah. Oh, there. Well,
Sorry.
that one works. I was noticing that you have both light rail and bus there. Are you envisioning those as one-way circuits or sharing, or what's the plan there?
So we think the light rail, well, that's more of a long term, right? Because the tracks and everything's going to be more pricey. But in the interim, we were envisioning this could be like a guided way, like a Park Boulevard, where the BRT, so buses can use it until the light rail moves in. So this is just giving you kind of a visual thinking of not like having them both running at the same time. It will be a single type.
Okay, I was just concerned. I've seen cities put in light rail that only goes one direction, and it tends to be fairly restrictive, particularly when there's an outage in the road or construction.
Agree, 100% agree.
All right, thank you.
All right, in the interest of time, I'm sorry, I'm going to hold off on the other questions, then we can move on to option number 2. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Fang Nguyen. Fang, take away.
Good evening, everyone. So I will be discussing option 2, which this one facilitate vehicular access throughout University Avenue in the interest of serving the business that are based there. This option is very similar to option 1, so I will focus on the changes that occur instead of the whole network discussions, also in the interest of time. Under this option, University Avenue between 6th and Park will be a 1 lane for vehicular in each direction. It will have transit running down the center of University Avenue, as well as we are proposing a change along Robinson Avenue between 10th and Park, which I will cover in the next slide. As shown on your screen, most of the options are very similar to option 1, with the exception of University Avenue, and as I mentioned, it will be 1 lane in each direction for vehicle, and we will discuss that when we go through the cross sections. And then Robinson Avenue will be converted from a two lane with 2-way left turn lane to just a 2-lane roadway, repurpose the existing 2-way left turn lane for class 2 bike lanes. So as I mentioned, under this option, there are some challenges regarding University Avenue. One of the issues is that there is a lack of full premium bicycle facility along University Avenue, specifically between 6th and 10th, where there are constraints due to right-of-way, and also existing buildings that are relatively new, and especially over the bridge. Thus, in order to offset this effect, we propose to also include a class 4 along Washington's. We understand that Washington does cross through quite a few freeway entrance and exit, creating very unsafe condition here. So additional engineering treatment would be needed along that corridor. Additionally, Robinson Avenue will be a class 2 between Vermont and Park, and University between 10th and Park will remain as a class 4 cycle track. So just to paint a better picture, we'll be discussing the cross section similar to option 1. University Avenue in the western section remained the same as what Monique presented for option 1. It will be a 2-lane roadway with bike lane on both sides and then parking on one side. Robinson Avenue similarly is the same as option 1, still full vehicular access with parking on both sides. There's a difference between option 1 and option 2 for the middle segment due to the constraint along this section, especially the bridge, also the right-of-way in front of Whole Foods and so on. The bicycle will have to share the facility with the vehicular for the eastbound and westbound travel lane whereas the light rail transit take up the center of the road in compared to option 1 where those are being replaced with class 4 cycle track. Robinson Avenue for the middle sections will be the same, remain the same as option 1, just 2 lane in each direct, 1 lane in each directions, especially over the bridge. And then the eastern section is where you will see a difference between option 1 and option 2. Under option 2, there will still be 1 lane for vehicle in each directions. The diagonal parking that are there now will be converted to parallel parking and repurpose that extra right-of-way for a bike lane. I would like to also call your attention to the curb to curb. When compared to option 1, increase from 70 feet to 84 feet. Some of these will have to be through redevelopment, especially between Normal Street and Park, where there, the old Wells Fargo building on the north side may have a chance of redevelopment, but we're conscious of brand new building that just went in as well. And then Robinson Avenue, which is on the next slide, is, as shown, we are repurposing the center left turn lane to provide bike lane on both sides. There, due to a lot of multifamily housing on both sides, we are keeping the parallel parking. The curb to curb remain the same. And with that, let's go to the next slide. And in the interest of time, to save time for the public comment, we will now open for public comment.
And I just maybe before we open to public comment, I just want to reiterate what Fong said. Essentially, in this scenario where we've reallocated vehicular activity on University Avenue, it doesn't allow us because of that use to do that quality bike facility. So essentially, what we're seeing is creating better bike facilities on the 2 other east-west roads to make up for that. So that's just the high-level summary of what this option would do.
So we can take clarifying questions on option 2. Ian, you've had your hand up for a while now. We'll take your question.
Mute. There we go. One of my questions was, we're talking about light rail versus streetcar. Is it the idea that the light rail, the streetcar obviously would just have overhead electric and stop not necessarily at a station, but just stop along, kind of like a Prague or a Portland scenario? Is that what we're talking about, or is it actually like a trolley light rail? I'd like to clarify that question.
SANDAG currently envisions a streetcar on that throughout the community instead of a trolley. We don't know the specific until it reached the design stage.
Yeah, and even if it was a streetcar, it likely wouldn't be, the kind of streetcar that you think of where vehicles would be utilizing the same space. It would still probably function like a trolley, and it might be able to have additional stops rather than, the full like 100 or 250 foot stops that the trolleys need, but it would still likely take its own right of way, which is, kind of makes a big deal with how we're envisioning the roadways.
Thank you.
Mary, go ahead.
I can wait till the final session. Oh wait, were you talking to me or did you say Brer?
To you.
Okay, I can wait for the final discussion.
Sure.
Okay.
Sharon Gell has also had her physical hand up, so we can go to her next, and then to Sanjay, and then anyone else who raises their hand between then we'll have to wait till the last group discussion.
Okay, thank you. I have a question on the bike lane on Washington. I understood that, my question is where it goes when it gets to Mission Hills, because I understood that we couldn't have it on Washington because you couldn't continue on Washington down to India Street, because the flyover from the end of University that goes over Washington, the supports on it are right next to the street. There's no room, right next to the road, that there's no room for bike path there. That you had to keep the bike lane on University in order to be able to connect to India Street at the bottom of the hill. Are you familiar? Do you know what I mean by the flyover at the end of University that connects to Washington?
Yeah, I would say, in a scenario where there is a bike lane on Washington, you might lose some of that connectivity, and it might be, a shared facility or whatever, which is kind of the interaction and the give and take that we're talking about, right? We ultimately would love to provide that quality facility on University, but if that isn't an option, then these are the other things that we might have to do. And so, the facility on Washington might not be as robust or as nice as one would want, and that's kind of that give and take trade-off of these scenarios.
Okay, I'm still confused. I know, Tanner, I think you did look at that whole section, and you know what I mean by the supports under that bridge.
Yeah, Sharon, I was just going to jump in. So for within our study area, the cycle track is going to come in at the expense of on-street parking. So on-street parking is going to be removed. Once they get to the narrow areas, needs to transition down to University. That is not part of it's outside of our study area. That's why you don't see it. I believe it's Albatross, right, Sasha, where it needs to transition down to University. You're on mute, Sasha. Okay. All right, we can move on, but it would need to transition down. Otherwise, just like Tanner said, as it approaches the western side, when they get to the flyover, and it will be a mixed flow. But the reason you don't see it on the map, because the map doesn't go as far west as it is.
Yeah, I know that's not in the district, in the area, but I was wondering if you were considering all the connections.
Sharon, to answer that question, I understand that the bridge with the flyover, SANDAG is actually currently looking at designing that portion to be protected bikeway along Washington Street, starting from India and heading all the way up, stopping where the Washington and University Avenue meet. We'll have to talk to SANDAG to see where they are with their design process, but I can put a link of the information regarding the Washington Class 4 and protected bicycle facility into the chat for everyone.
Thank you. It was my understanding that SANDAG was coming up Washington and then, yes, going on to University.
Yes, and the
I
reason
haven't
they want
heard anything recently. Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk with them and we'll come back and update the group on that.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Sanjay. My question is, what for option 2? I heard on option 1 you were discussing University having extended sidewalks and potential for parklets. I didn't hear that for option 2. Would there be any? What would the impact be on option 2 to pedestrian experience, whether it be parklets or whatnot? Is there any opportunity for that, or would it just be what is currently there now? Over.
I can chime in real quick, Sanjay. So Fong was talking about earlier, this is really the eastern section, really focusing between, I would say, 9th or 10th Street to Avenue to about Normal Street. And so for that section, the existing curb to curb is ranging from 103 to 110 feet. So if you're implementing option 1, the curb to curb will only be 70 feet. So you're going to have about 30 to 40 feet to play with in terms of improved pedestrian realm and that kind of walking or placemaking environment or opportunities. But then if you look at option 2, because we're keeping the on-street parking, keeping one traveling each direction, that curb to curb went from 70 feet to 84 feet. So you still have some room, but it's just smaller than what you will get from option 1.
Thank you.
Are we ready to move on? Sasha.
Let's move on.
Does my audio work, or can you guys hear me?
Oh yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, good. I think whichever one I started with stopped working and then I switched over. Okay. So this is option 3. This option was developed to blend the benefits of options 1 and 2, which is to provide a separated east-west bicycle facility through Hillcrest along University Avenue, while also accommodating the SANDAG planned transit right-of-way and also maintaining vehicular access. The option 3 network is able to accomplish all this by converting University Avenue and Robinson Avenue to a one-way couplet in Western Hillcrest. In the next slide, we'll show what changes to the roadways are suggested as a part of this option. So in this option, University Avenue is westbound between 1st Avenue and 9th Avenue. The fire station that's on 9th and University thereby maintains access to University Avenue in both directions. The Robinson one-way portion is eastbound between 1st and 10th, enabling motorists in Western Hillcrest to still access 163 in both directions along Robinson, southbound at 8th and then northbound via 10th. And the one-way couplet enables the most constrained segment of University in Western Hillcrest, that is the segment between 6th and 9th, where the curb width is 56 feet, to go to one travel lane, creating the space then that is needed to continue the bicycle facility and the transit right-of-way. That'll be shown in the cross sections later on. This network also features some of the same changes that were recommended in the first 2 options, such as what is recommended for Washington and Eastern Hillcrest, the Bachman classification, as well as normal and 6th. All of those are the same in each of the 3 options you've seen. Robinson to a two-lane collector is the same as the option Fong just presented, option 2. The one-way couplet would require some minor realignment of some existing bus routes. That's fact is not lost on us, and we've considered some ideas for how to make this option work with any planned rapid bus as well as the current local routes. I won't go into that detail during this part of the presentation, but if there's interest in discussing that later, that can be a part of Q&A. Next slide, please. An added benefit of this option, in addition to being able to complete the cycle track through along University through most of Hillcrest, is that this can also enable continuous bike lanes on Robinson Avenue as well. The most constrained part of Robinson is the bridge that's over 163. Bringing that section down to one lane creates the space available for bike lanes over the bridge using the counterflow style bikeway design. The upcoming cross-section slides will show how the one-way roads and the bicycle facilities interface in this option, allowing for the two-way bicycle travel. Next slide. So in option 3, it's a little bit different than the first 2 options for University Avenue and Western Hillcrest. This option shows a cycle track, a separated bicycle facility with one-way westbound travel. Parking is removed on both sides, unlike options 1 and 2, where it's only removed on one side. And as you see, the eastbound bike lane on the left side of the option 3 cross section has got a 3-foot separation, as well as the other bike lane going in the other direction. Next slide. Robinson Avenue in the western section, this also would require parking removal in order to fit bike lanes in both directions. This time the counterflow bicycle facility is going westbound while the travel lanes are going eastbound. And there's about 3 feet of buffer separating the westbound cycling space from the eastbound travel lanes. In this option, University Avenue between 6th and 9th, there's one travel lane going westbound. So this is where University would have to, in this one-way idea, would have to drop down to one lane in order to fit all of the different modes that are being accommodated. So there's the one westbound travel lane, the transit right of way, and then you have the cycle track going through this constrained part of University in Western Hillcrest. Next slide. So then this is Robinson Avenue over 163. This is a very narrow bridge, as many of you know, and by eliminating one travel lane, allowing the one-way couplet, allowing us to go down to one travel lane instead of two, provides the space needed to have bike lanes going in both directions. Next slide. In option 3, the University from about 10th to normal is the same as what Fong presented in option 2. It's a 2-lane with two travel lanes, one in each direction, with the transit and the cycle track and parking, and quite a bit of leftover space from what the current curb to curb width is in that area, which is about 103 to 110 feet of width. So that extra space we envision could be going towards pedestrian amenities or perhaps some of this need for park space, linear parks or whatever, urban design type elements. Next slide. And then Robinson in Eastern Hillcrest. In our alternative, we would, it's the same as in this option, the center left turn lane goes away just like it did in option 2, allowing the bike lane to be continuous through the Hillcrest neighborhood along Robinson as well. And with that, we can either do questions or we can turn it back over to Shannon and have our main question and answer, depending on what the city wants to do.
Yeah, thank you, Sasha. So we have a little less than a half an hour remaining in the meeting. So I will defer to the chair, Roy, how you would like to handle this discussion. I think some people will have some clarifying questions on option 3, but we also want to hear from the public and the subcommittee generally on all the options. You know, is there a preference towards one of the options or another, or are there certain features that you like or don't like about the options? So, Mr. Chairman, I will defer to you and let you decide how you would like to run this.
All right, so my internet's been on and off. It's really spotty, so we need better internet in this country. But at any rate, I think given that we only have half hour, I think we could, and a lot of the comments previous were general comments anyway, that we should just go to the general comments and hear what people have to say about all these 3 options. And if you have a question about option 3 specifically, you can just mix that in. So let's open it up to general comments.
And would you like to start with the public?
Yes, I think that's best.
Okay. Mary, you've been so patient. Let's start with you.
Oh, no worries. I was saving the best for last. It's a joke. Anyway, no, I just, the one thing interestingly, and especially since Roy is the chair of this group, are you guys talking with the parking people? And the second thing is, there's a couple things, but that's one thing. If you guys are talking to the parking people, and, who are doing all that work up here in Hillcrest to do bicycle lanes and figure out new parking. So one of my questions is, how are we going to tell people there are new rules about where you can park and how you can park? Because, the structure of the roads is changing, and I don't see an education effort. I'm not sure if that's you, and that's why the parking district thing. Yeah, it actually all relates. It relates my other sort of, well, never mind. It was about the DMV needing to perhaps test all of us again on new rules after all this is settled down. But anyway, thank you for coming. Good presentation. Appreciated it.
Who's
So
next?
Roy, we'll
We're
leave
not
it up to
gonna-
you.
no,
Given
We're going to take all the comments and then we'll respond at the end.
All right, how about Nevo?
Thank you. Great presentation. Because we have limited time, I'll just ask my questions and hopefully you can answer them at the end. I'd like to know if, as I understand it, the University Avenue and Robinson Avenue bridges over the 163 are owned and maintained by Caltrans. And, until now, they haven't always, synchronized with city plans. For example, there's no bike lane on University Avenue over SR 163. And so I wanted to know if there would be any sort of synchronization of efforts, especially with the Robinson Bridge. The sidewalk's very narrow and perhaps the bridge needs to be updated a bit. And if that would be under the purview of this Plan Hillcrest process. And I think that's my main question now. Thank you.
All right, we're just going to move on to the next question, and for the sake of time, Ian.
Let me unmute, thank you. Yeah, it's a bit frustrating because I see all three options still as a auto-centric paradigm. And, I'm thinking of the last mile planners around the world are thinking this whole update idea is the idea of a destination, a community, a village, and the idea that you have all these things passing through it. The mobility, it seems to be more of a just let's try to mitigate traffic a little better. I'm a little concerned that it doesn't have to be a universal city kind of thing where you get out of your car and you move into a central district. There has to be some balance between commerce and that is always traditionally recognized that cars have to stop, get out of their car, go to the business and get back in their car and go about their business. What I guess I'm suggesting is that this has gone very far in the planning, and the mobility seems to be a little backwards. And the idea that it should be more streetcars like a Portland model. We have all these models out there in the world, and it seems like we're just trying to mitigate this, mitigate that, put a little finer point on that, turn left here. It seems to be a little frustrating. Washington Street has always been a pass through that people trying to get from I-5 to their communities in El Cajon and eastward. So I think it's a little too late for my comments, but and I know Roy's big on big data with his math skills, but he'll talk about that. But yeah, I just think it's too auto-centric. So that's my comment. And if there's any position on that question, thank you.
Thank you, Ian. We're going to move on to Sanjay and then to the subcommittee members.
Thank you hi, this is Sanjay. Thank you again for doing this. I appreciate it. I liked all the options. I liked parts of all the options. I would like to echo Ian that I think this is still very car centric. I think I understand that that's okay though, because we're transitioning, hopefully as a city, we're transitioning away to more active micromobility and transit. I would like to add, or question is have we considered where we could put in city-owned parking to move the parking off street, so that way we could actually, increase the amount of bike lanes and active transit and improve pedestrian access and reduce and improve flow by having cars parallel parking in and out, slowing down traffic and making it, creating conflicts for bicyclists and pedestrians. Over.
Thank you. Does anyone from our mobility team want to quickly address any of those questions that were just asked before we get into the subcommittee comments?
Yeah, I was jotting down notes here. So to Mary's question, we have not outreached specifically with the community parking district. We certainly could. Roy is obviously a conduit to that. And then there was also kind of a question about when these large transformations come, how do people know how to use them? And essentially, I mean, number one, these will likely take place over a very long time, but that's all part of the design and implementation process. Things need to be done to standards, and the reason that those standards are there is so that people, it's a recognized format and recognized standard. It's so that people will know how to use those, right? That's all part of like the engineering and design and implementation. To Nevo's comments about about Caltrans and the bridges. I mean, yes, essentially we coordinate with them, and we understand that there's not really any option to widen them, and so we are making recommendations, and we're trying to figure out our plan to how to accommodate for that. And so our plans will show what we would recommend over those rights of ways, and then when it comes time for implementation, whoever's doing that, likely the city just has to work with and permit or whatever with Caltrans when that's coming. So that's how that dynamic works. And then really the other questions were kind of just mentioning that the plan is still auto-centric, and we realize that there are two options, or really, well, two options that still show vehicles, kind of through the core of the community. But I think by developing and seriously developing a completely pedestrian transit and bike and active transportation corridor through the community, that's in this realm, in this world, that that is really, I think, in our minds, pushing the envelope, and should that option weigh out, that's what we're very much trying not to be auto-centric, or at least provide an option that isn't auto-centric. And then to Sanjay's comment about where the plan will continue to identify kind of a park once option. And that's where we could definitely work with the community parking district. I know they've been looking to do that for a long time. That Rite Aid location has always been talked about, in terms of a location where a parking structure could be built. So, there's really not a lot that the plan will be able to do other than to talk about policies as to where that could and would occur. But we will definitely continue to evaluate and make those policy recommendations in the plan. And I think that was essentially the majority of those, if we wanted to move into committee comments.
Yes, let's move into committee comments. Matt Medeiros.
Hello. First of all, thank you all for your time and what you've presented today. Can you just jump to page 49 for a second? I just want to get a question answered there if I could. Yeah. So one of the things I was looking at here on option 2 and 3, I mean, clearly to me, option 3 seems to have the best overall flow from a standpoint of biking and vehicular transportation in general. So I do like option 3 of that structure. But to echo a little bit of what Ian said, it kind of points out to me here in the option 3 scenario with the parallel parking on the sides there. I'd like to go to option 3B. When we looked at option 1 and we have this 70-foot curb to curb as opposed to the 84-foot curb to curb by implementing that parallel parking space, you're going to create a lot more traffic congestion with waiting for people to parallel park in that. You're creating more of a safety issue. By removing that parking, and as someone said, if somehow we can create a parking hub on the outside to then better utilize the streetcar coming through here to bring people in, as Ian said, to that last mile, that would make a whole lot more sense to me, where we could then also at the same time get back that extra 14 or so feet on the edges to get back to the other pieces that we were talking about as far as more angular parks and having more space to work with on the sides for the potential of adding the housing, adding more of a business frontage to the pedestrian area right there. And that would make a whole lot more sense from that standpoint, while still providing plenty of flow there for the bike, and option 3 here, the all westbound traffic. That just becomes a lot more of a safety issue, and I do like the flow. So to me, from that standpoint of what was presented, that's kind of where I would lean. They all have good general senses. Clearly, I want to see more shade, more canopy, more tree. That's that whole aspect of this as we go. But and I think as we look at this and keep the focus on, I know a lot of folks, I hear the comments of what's going to happen tomorrow. This isn't about tomorrow. This is about 30 years from today. I know people are worried about, where am I going to park? How is my business going to survive? This is about bringing people to that community, and having that transit in place to do so is going to enable us to do that, where we're going to have a more vibrant community overall and grow from within, as opposed to always having to worry about where are we going to park tomorrow. So my 2 cents, and again, thank you. I appreciate the presentation and all the good work you guys put in on this.
Thank you, Matt. Breer, you're next.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Hi. It's been really great watching this. First, I'd just like to make a request that perhaps we could get these presentations up front. Sometimes it's a little hard to digest on the fly and also follow the chat. And so I think it would be helpful for the board members and the public to be able to at least maybe have one day to review it so that they can make a truly informed comment on what they're seeing. But that considered, Matt hit a lot of the things that I was going to say. So I think I would just like to reiterate, what I've said before about reducing our car traffic and really focusing on other modes of traffic or other modes of transport, which you've done really well here. As long as we're working to accommodate our current levels of through traffic and private automobile traffic, we're going to have a difficult time getting some of these other modes fit into our streets. And I think that that's what some of the comments in the chat were trying to express about being auto-centric. We need these other modes, we want these other modes, but we're still trying to carry all of the car traffic. And I know we need to carry some of it, but I think that at some point we're going to have to accept the fact that we can't maintain the current volumes and get the things that we want. And that we're going to have to accept that the good options to get the things that we want will mean less capacity for private automobiles. And I think that's okay. The traffic will go elsewhere, as we've seen in other cities that have deconstructed entire freeways. People figure it out. And at the moment, I feel like a lot of our traffic is through traffic connecting to other parts of Uptown and North Park. And they will find another way. And so that said, I think that a number of these options would be great, but I do continue to have reservations about one-way couplets. And it's particularly because of my experience with them downtown, where they've become multi-lane, high-speed corridors. And the option that you presented with one-way couplets, it's seen as a way to start making space for these other uses, which is great. But if these turn into racetracks, then it's going to negate some of the benefits of these other facilities by having high-speed car traffic. So I understand that maybe you have a plan to mitigate that, but I just want to point out that that's probably the option that I'm least comfortable with, only because of car traffic speeds. All of the other multimodal stuff along University is great. I think that there is a need to also consider the two bridges on Robinson and University as things that need to go away, and something we need to push for, from the community at the community level, to allow the designs to be more expansive and inclusive. And you might consider, the eventual replacement of those bridges in your designs. I mean, I know they're historic, but they are substandard and decrepit. And I'll just stop there. Thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it.
Anyone else from the subcommittee?
Yes, I do have a comment.
Oh, go ahead.
So is the streetcar considered a sort of an integral component of the east-west and the north-south?
Yeah, I would say that the short answer to that is yes. That is essentially the major planned transit, like you said, east, west, and north, south. So as it relates to that mode, I would call those integral parts of the plan.
Yeah, if so, that would indicate that that a plan should probably be made in a preliminary basis, but then the plan be held for some period of time until there's a firm plan and funding for the streetcar. We certainly wouldn't want to go ahead on the plan if the streetcar was going to come through here in 15 years, for example. Does that make sense?
Well, it does. And as you're looking at here on this screen, at least for University, so the east-west portion of it, there is the interim plan where we're dedicating the right-of-way for probably what would amount to a bus rapid transit prior to the more robust and expensive trolley or streetcar. And then, similarly, the same would likely occur on 6. So that would be the interim plan is something that doesn't cost as much and it likely, like I said, would amount to bus rapid transit.
No, I appreciate that. And I think interim plans and phased plans make a lot of sense. There's not enough money and not enough demand to implement any grand plans all at once. But Tanner, I appreciate that on a phased basis. I think it makes sense. Okay.
Thanks. I'll make a couple comments then also. It's hard for me to fathom how we're going to add a lot of support the cities and states plans and reduce the number of car trips that this design calls for. All along, I've always known that it's the east-west only having Robinson, Washington, and University is a problem. That's if you're doing a network analysis, you forget about all the details. It's just there's not enough volume to carry traffic. And some of it's through traffic. And so you're going to say no through traffic in our community, but yet our community is dependent upon a lot of people coming from outside of our area in order to support our businesses. Having spent most of my life in suburban type environments, I understand that in the suburbs, you get a couple of restaurants that are chains. You don't get the kind of intense business group that we have the privilege of being able to walk to all these different restaurants, walk to supermarkets and everything else like that. I just don't see any analysis showing how you're going to put all those extra cars in there and all those extra people, and they're not going to have the cars. I do believe that some of the comments, like what Matt said about you're going to have to take all the parking off all the streets, which means you're going to have to put parking under buildings. So we've eliminated parking under buildings, so that's a problem because the only way you're going to be able to take our existing right-of-ways and make this work, at least for the next 20 years, is to move
He said he was having trouble with his internet.
Yeah.
All right. I guess I'm lost.
No,
All
you're
right.
good now.
I think I've said enough anyway. I made my points. That's good. The city, you want to, so what's,
I see Gail has her hand up. We can move on to Gail for her comments.
Thank you. So I think there's, some comment, I agree about we need to move away from autocentric. And as we move forward, if we build more housing for people who are able to walk in the neighborhood, like I moved in this neighborhood, so I wouldn't have to drive my car. I can walk to the grocery store. I can walk. That's important. So if we can eliminate parking in areas with dense housing, I think people are attracted to that kind of living environment. I would love to get rid of my car. I have it because I need it for my work. So I don't think we should, I think talking about parking and eliminated parking is a good thing. And I think we need to talk about the future. I'm an older resident in this neighborhood. I am concerned about what's coming forward. I live on the corner of University and Robinson. Florence Elementary School is across the street. That's the people we need to think about in this neighborhood, and not people like me who are an older person. So I think this is, I just want to thank you for these presentations. I think we need to look at these other options, and we need to move away from the car-centric that we've been accustomed to. Also, one more thing I wanted to ask, what are these options? What does the hospital think about these options? Or have they looked at all of them?
No, to answer that and other questions about maybe the Hillcrest Business Improvement District and the Community Parking District, as you guys are the subcommittee for this from the planning group, this is being vetted with you first, and additional outreach would be done, as the plan proceeds. But you guys are seeing this first as kind of the body that's supposed to see it first. But with that said, as Shannon mentioned in a previous comment, we are communicating, just like we're communicating with SANDAG and Caltrans and others. We are communicating with UCSD and the hospital and those bodies.
Is there any other subcommittee members who want to make a comment? If not, Monique, if you could pull up the last slide. I just want to talk before the meeting ends about our next steps. And I also, in the chat, I put my email. I know most of you have my email, but just in case you weren't able to ask your questions or provide your comment, we strongly encourage you to email us so that we can respond and also hear your feedback. So to talk about next steps, our next meeting is on July 15th, and we'll have a presentation on the LGBTQ+ historic context statement and cultural districts work that has been done thus far. We will take August off, then convene in September for more refined land use and urban design concepts. And as mentioned earlier, we aim to have an online community engagement tool launched this fall. Please, review this presentation online and email us with any more feedback or questions or ideas that you have, because we want to take the feedback that we've received today, refine these concepts to include them in the online engagement tool. So thank you so much for everything you've provided us today, and we look forward to these future meetings.
May we share the presentation?
Sorry, Mary, ask that one more time.
May we share the presentation?
Yes, it is public. It's up on the website, so you may share it with people you know. Yes.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the presentation.
Roy, do you have any last final words?
I'll just apologize. My internet's gone off at least 3 times. That's what you get when you pay for extra super fast internet. Thanks everybody for their participation.
4 times.
Exactly. There he went again.
It was bound to happen.
All right. I have to ask our mobility team, do you guys have any final words before we end?
Just to reiterate what you said, Shannon, feel free to look at the presentation. If there's other clarifying questions over the next several months, contact us. Our emails are in the first slide as well. And, we'll continue to vet and kind of hone these in, put it on the OSET so you guys can have your final voting kind of inputs in the fall. And that's it.
Thank you all so much. Have a good night. See you at the next meeting.
Thank you all. Nice
Bye.
job.
Thank you.